Azeem Akhtar is CTO of BT Global and has spent a lot of his professional life thinking about the opportunities handed to him and how to pay that forward to future generations. In this episode, he talks about how his background has provided him with perspective in a world which always demands more, how to manage teams, as well as his roles negotiating mega deals with large clients. We had a great time speaking to Azeem and are confident that there are a lot of little things to learn from this episode. So Azeem, thank you very much for joining us on the Leadership Unplugged podcast. We like to kind of talk to our leaders about their upbringing, their journey today, and how they got to the position in which they're in now. And the first question I wanted to ask you was around leadership. And I wanted to ask you if you could think of some movie images which depict leadership and kind of what comes to mind and how those images influence your style of leadership so far.
Some movie. That's interesting. It's a really good question. I'm going to make this religious right from the beginning, because one of the first movies I remember watching as a kid was The Message, back in 1977. I'm showing how old I am now, but I would have been about 7 or 8 years old, and obviously The Message is a movie all about Islam and about the Prophet, peace be upon him, how Islam started and how it was then spread, at the time he was alive. And obviously they don't depict the Prophet ﷺ in that movie, but you learn enough about him. And if you're a kid and you're very impressionable and you've got a sense of love for your religion and for the Prophet already imbued in you, then this almost made it a little bit more real. And some of the messages that really came to me from that were that leadership is all about doing good for other people. It's all about serving. And that was something which, the Prophet was very, very strong on. And, his mission was all about serving people and guiding people to something that would benefit them in this life and also the next life. And I think what I felt from that was that you have to lead by example. You have to have clarity of thought. You have to be someone who can appeal to every kind of demographic. And this is something that he was very expert in. He reached out to old and young alike, to both sexes, people who were wealthy, people who were downtrodden, people who were impoverished. Everybody was able to relate to him. And that was because of his leadership style. So one of the key things that I learned was that, if you move into the corporate space, you're never going to have a team that's going to be homogenous in terms of everybody's exactly the same. There'll be lots of different personalities. There'll be people from different backgrounds, and they've all had a different lived experience. So what you've got to do as a leader is you have to be able to connect with those people in the first instance, so that whatever you say as a leader is something that will resonate with them, at least in part. It might not resonate completely, and that might take time, as you build that relationship. But you have to have a sense of fairness in terms of how you engage. You have to have a sense of empathy. And I think you have to have a very strong sense of direction as well. You need to know where you are and where you're going, so that when you're leading, people behind you have utmost confidence in the fact that you're taking them somewhere that they want to go to. And that can be just in terms of the objectives for that day or that month or that year, or it could be a much bigger and longer strategic plan that the company has put in place. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, his leadership style, which was all about engaging in the most effective way, with a high degree of intelligence. And that's something which people don't understand, because they think something that happened such a long time ago, 1400 years ago, there can't have been the sophistication that we have now, because we're very arrogant now that we think that we've solved everything and we're much better than anyone that was living in medieval times or even before that. But actually what you see is that there was a high degree of emotional intelligence in terms of how he engaged. And that's a really important part of leadership for me. And I think academic intelligence helps as well, because you need to have a plan is really important. I think there's a saying, isn't there, that to want to do something without a plan is just a dream, right? But if you've got a plan, then it becomes a vision. So then it becomes something which is actionable. And that was probably the first sort of movie. That the other movie that everyone knows, my kids know this, that I love this movie, is a movie called Where Eagles Dare. It's a 1969 movie with Richard Burton and Clint Eastwood, and it's all about this crack sort of group of commandos who are going to go and rescue this general from a German prison in the Second World War. And it's like this castle in the Alps, and I just love that movie because it was all about leadership. Richard Burton is like this major, and he's got this lieutenant colonel, I think it is. It's in Clint Eastwood, and then the dynamic about how he leads and how ultimately it's all about trust, because he looks like he's a double agent, but he isn't. He's just doing that so that he can fox the enemy. But at some point during that movie, his own side think he's a double agent, but the people who really trust him know who he is. And I think that's really important. So one of the key things I took away from that was how important trust is, with your team, that you've got to have their trust, and you've got to behave in such a way that, you don't compromise that trust.
I wanted to pick up on a point that you opened with, that leadership is about service. And it feels as though in today's society, we've become an individualistic society where leadership is often seen as kind of outcome-based, and there are wider ramifications for that within the corporate world, where you see kind of shareholder kind of profit maximization as the only goal, and you see all of the issues which come with that system of business. How would you counter those narratives, and how do we kind of bring back that ethos of service for others, altruism, within our societies and also within the corporate world, within the organizations we work with, and within business itself?
Yeah, again, it's a good question. I think a lot of what we see that's wrong in corporates, a lot of what we see that's wrong in sport, when people turn up at football matches and they chant racist stuff, or a lot of the discrimination we see still in the corporate workplace. And, that could be discrimination, whether it's age or gender, ethnicity, whatever it would be. These are problems which exist manifestly within society, within the fabric of society. So there is something, manifestly wrong in terms of society, right? In terms of, the importance of the individual over the collective. And this is something, again, I don't want to get political, but this is something that we saw more and more during Mrs. Thatcher's reign. And, I think she even said at one point that there is no such thing as society. Now, I'm all for people feeling that as individuals, they get opportunities. They are given every opportunity to actually thrive and progress. But that shouldn't be at the expense of anybody else. And it shouldn't be an either or. And it's not an either or. And I think my understanding always of leadership has always been that, like I said, it is about service. And it's about making sure that if you get a break and you're able to go to a good university, you're able to go to a good school, go to a good university, and then get a good job, then there's others that would have been as talented as you are, but they didn't get those breaks. And you've got to be cognizant of that throughout your career, that you are privileged if you've got into that. And they always tell you that you're in the 0.1% or the upper quartile or whatever it is of society, that you've had that. So to answer your question, I think, first of all, there has to be a high degree of humility that if we've got the breaks that others haven't, that we're cognizant of that. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we've got to, as leaders, think about how we can have an impact beyond just the corporate workspace in terms of how we carry ourselves in society. When we get involved in things outside of work, volunteering activities, non-exec director roles, I've been involved in a number of those sorts of things. What can we do so that we can make a meaningful change in society in terms of giving people who are downtrodden, people who are systemically being discriminated against, what can we do as leaders to give those people a voice? And that's really, really important. So I think people just generally need to be better, and that applies to all of us. We just need to be nicer to each other. We need to be blind to color, to ethnicity, to religion. We need to be there thinking about giving people opportunities, because this is the optimum economic model as well. Again, I'm not going to get political, but the problem with things like Brexit and some of the xenophobia that surrounded that was that we've seen that we've ended up in a very difficult economic situation, the cost of living crisis or whatever you want to call it. And then that was exacerbated by the Ukraine war. If you think in economic terms that everybody is basically a factor of production and everybody has a contribution to make, if you're going to turn around and say actually that person can't contribute because he or she is the wrong sex, the wrong color, the wrong religion, then by definition you've got a suboptimal model. That means that you're not getting the best out of the resources that are at your disposal. And also it's manifestly fundamentally unfair, right? And that's going to breed resentment and discontentment in that individual and across society as a whole, which is what we've seen. So I think we've got to be really clear that when we get into a situation where we're in stormy seas, as we are now, we need everybody to be able to paddle, but we need to have the right people paddling in the right positions. And that means that we have to harness the talent that we've got in society, irrespective, as I say, of their ethnicity or their gender or whatever else. And that's where I think at the moment we're getting it wrong. We're getting it very wrong. To be able to do that, you need leaders who themselves are drawn from those different groups. Because if you have a model where it's, you've got middle-aged white males who are basically running these organizations, then they're telling everybody that we're a diverse and inclusive organization, that for me doesn't work. That's not a diverse and inclusive organization, because that diverse and inclusivity has to permeate all the way through at every level, including the highest level. And at the moment, I think, as I say, to your question, if we don't start thinking about, should society change corporates? Should corporates change society? The common factor in all of that is people. People have to change the way in which they engage. We have to be different in terms of when we're working for corporates, we're very conscious of the brand. We're very conscious of not letting our brand down. And there'll be a constitution, there'll be a code of conduct that's there, and that is there to regulate our behavior, as an employee of a corporate. But there isn't a code of conduct for society generally. That just comes from common sense. That comes from your upbringing. It comes from understanding, your religion can give you that morality. And what we're seeing again now, and this is one of the, I think, unfortunate things that we're seeing now, is that religion is ridiculed now. People who, what religion gave people was some sort of moral compass. And as a Muslim, it certainly provides me with my moral compass. And, when we engage with other people who are from different faiths and they are also, they've got some sort of a moral compass, it makes it easier because you know that there's going to be some sort of code of conduct there. And the fact that we've become so much more secular in society has meant that it becomes very much about the individual. It becomes very much about corporate goals, greed, and it's almost as if we have to achieve that at any cost. And the cost very often is mental health, physical health of the employees.
I wanted to touch on a couple of things, actually taking it back to maybe your childhood and upbringing itself. You mentioned the fact that humility, carrying yourselves in the right way, and also helping those in society which didn't necessarily have the same opportunities as yourself. Are those things which were kind of embedded in you during your upbringing, or is it something that you kind of found out and developed later on in your life?
No, I think I was probably very aware of it from the start of my childhood. My parents were very clear that we're privileged, and there's many people out there who have a fraction of what we've got, so we should always be grateful. So gratitude to Allah, to God, was absolutely essential, and it was the most important. As a child, the most important thing I was being taught before I was taught how to pray was you've got to be grateful to Allah. You have to be grateful to God because there are so many people who've got so much less than we have. So that was the first thing. Then my lived experience, I was born in the UK, but then originally I'm Pakistani from Lahore, and we would go back to Lahore fairly regularly, and you'd see poverty, that you wouldn't see here. I remember once being a teenager, being in Lahore, going to this drive-in place where you get sort of grilled food, lamb chops, etc. My favorite. And I remember pulling up, and I was with my cousins in a car. We were eating lamb chops and just throwing the bones out the car as you do there. And I remember halfway through that, I suddenly realized that I didn't hear the clink of the bone hitting the floor. So I leaned out through the window, had a look, and there were little kids. They were catching the bits of bone and basically eating whatever meat that was left on there. And it was a very humbling experience for me because I suddenly realized at that moment, I thought, the fact that I'm the one in the car and that little boy is the one outside the car, it's just fate. I didn't do anything to deserve to be in the car, and he didn't do anything to deserve to be the one that's going to be picking up and eating my leftovers. And I said I could quite easily have been that kid. There's, he's the same ethnicity, the same religion, same everything. It's just the way things have worked out that I'm the one in the car. And that had a profound impact on me, because I thought to myself that I identified with that kid, that I thought that that's me. Mm-hmm. And I've got to always be grateful for what Allah has given me. And I've also got to always make sure that if I'm in a position that I can do anything to help people who haven't had those breaks that we've had, then I will do something about that. So that was something which I felt from a very, very early age. And that's, I think, you can be idealistic about it and then not do much about it. And, this is a journey of continuous improvement for me. And I think it would be for many people, that you always, even if you do something, you always feel that you can do a lot more. And I always feel that enough hasn't been done. There should be no kid that sleeps without a roof on their head. There should be no kid that sleeps hungry. That shouldn't be happening anywhere in the world. And I think that's one thing which I was very, as I say, very conscious of from a very early age. And I've got kids, and they're grown up, mashallah, now. But that was something that's been instilled in them, that it's very, very important that you understand the blessings that you've got and be grateful for them. And the blessings can be taken away. We have to be cognizant of the fact that anything that's been given to us can be taken away. So, make the most of what you've got. We shouldn't feel guilty for what's been given to us. You should enjoy what we've been given. But also, always, if you can pay it forward in some way, pay it forward. But also, if you can do something more meaningful, even such as set something up, talk to people, inspire people, get a kid who was going to maybe not follow a professional route and go off into petty crime, then speak to them, help them, inspire them in whatever way, and tell them that I'm the same as you are. I'm the same as that kid who was picking up the bones from the floor. And we've got to be able to relate to those people, because that's who we are as well.
Just wanted to take it forward now a little bit. So you've talked about some of these formative experiences of your childhood. Now, looking at your time in university and thinking about what you want to do at university, obviously you attended some really prestigious institutions, the LSE, Imperial, etc., and you chose to study economics. What was the thought process behind that? Why did you kind of go into going to that field?
So my first degree was in maths, and I felt my dad's always been very big on maths, so I was looking to study all sorts of weird and wonderful things, and then I kept on looking at him, and I could see this sort of look of disapproval. And then when I suddenly turned around and said, "I'll do maths," he was like, "Oh, good, that's very good." So I didn't do chemistry; otherwise, I would have probably been doing medicine or something. But no, he was quite keen for me to do a STEM subject. And maths, I was good at maths, enjoyed maths, so I went into that. And then I also really enjoyed economics. So when I did my master's in economics, I felt that it was something that was for me. I wanted to do something that I really enjoyed, and I really enjoyed my time at LSE. It was great, and I think I was also probably very aware from a very early age, and probably a lot of this came from my parents, that we've got to be pragmatic in terms of the choices we make about academic subjects, etc. So whilst I might have really enjoyed, film studies or something, I didn't, but just as an example, studying that at university and then trying to eke out a career of that would have always been something difficult, I think. Whereas maths was going to open lots of doors for me. Economics was going to, being analytical, having a logical mind, etc., and training my mind in those sorts of disciplines was going to help me with the kind of career I've then ended up pursuing. So, whilst my parents would have been supportive of me doing something else, they would have also said to me, "Well, what are you going to do with that?" So I was always quite pragmatic about that as well. So that's the sort of the thought process that we went through. And I always say I said to my kids, my daughter studied, she was at Imperial as well, and she did a STEM subject. She did biology, and she's with Pricewaterhouse now. But my other daughter did languages, and she's very good at that. She got a first in double modern languages. So I'm very proud of what they've done. And again, I had a similar conversation with them about, when you do this, what do you want to do afterwards? Because what you don't want to do is study something which was a bit of a hobby, and then feel that the career that you wanted to pursue is now closed to you because you haven't got the right sort of training or the right discipline or enough knowledge of that discipline. So that's the sort of thought process that we went through.
That's quite interesting, the way you framed, I guess, just learning in general. And I wanted to kind of, when we spoke to leaders in the past, I've touched on the subject of lifelong learning quite a lot. And we found that the leaders that we have spoken to, they always do engage in this lifelong learning exercise. And I guess my question to you would be, is that something that you've developed? And if so, how did you kind of come across that? How have you maintained that throughout your career so far? And, you know, especially given that the environment is changing quite a lot with the introduction of AI and technology generally changing a lot, what kind of things can young people do now to encourage that lifelong learning habit, which will help them succeed in the future?
Yeah, I think one thing that's changed a lot, and you've sort of touched on it at the back end of your question there, is technology has really changed things. When I was younger, the internet didn't exist. My kids would think electricity didn't exist when I was younger, but the internet didn't exist. So if you wanted to learn about something, you went to the library and you got a book out and you read it. And that whole sort of process of getting on your bicycle or whatever, or walking to the library and finding the book and then bringing it home, there was quite a lot you needed to do to then be able to read something. Whereas now you literally just click on a page on Google and you go to the Wikipedia page and you learn everything literally in 30 seconds. So there was that process that we had to go through to acquire knowledge was much harder. But it also made it much more valuable in some ways. We weren't so flippant about knowledge. It was like, you read it and then you really tried to understand it because you knew you'd have to give that book back. It's not going to be something that you can go get back to. And also conversations that you would have with your elders or with other people who were from different fields that you might have been interested in. You really paid attention. You sat with them and you thought, okay, so, I wanted to be a cricketer when I was younger. So I met lots of famous cricketers and I'd talk to them about, how do you face somebody who's bowling at like 100 miles an hour? So I'd be sitting there listening to the hand-eye movement and, what do you do? So now you can look at YouTube and you can see everything. But as I say, having that one-to-one sort of tuition almost in any subject, which is what we went through, I think that was probably more powerful in some ways. We had far smaller breadth of knowledge because obviously, the internet's now opens things up so much. But what I'd say is that I always saw learning as being a journey of continuous improvement. You have to, the moment you think I know it all, then you clearly don't know anything at all. And that famous saying that if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room, that's something I've lived by that adage, because I always want to be in a room where everybody else is more knowledgeable than me, because I feel that I'm learning then. I've got some amazing friends who are real leaders in their fields, in Islamic finance, in economics, in trade, a whole bunch of different areas. And I sit with them and I hear their perspectives on a whole bunch of different topics. And I feel I grow because of that. So that's really important. So your question about, my sort of approach to learning has always been that learning is fun and it should be thought of as being fun. You should embrace learning. And that learning is, again, to sort of draw the parallel with religion. In Islam, there is so much emphasis put on learning and understanding. In fact, the very first thing the Prophet, peace be upon him, was told when the Quran was revealed was to read. He wasn't told to do anything. He was told to read. Iqra in Arabic. And that makes you realize that, learning changes your life and it can then change somebody else's life. The Prophet, through the revelation he received, has changed the lives of the 2 billion or so Muslims who are alive now and all the countless billions that have lived for the last 1400 years. So learning is really, really important. And it's also then putting your learning into practice and disseminating knowledge. One great thing about technology now is that it's so much easier to disseminate knowledge. You can learn so much more, and you can learn so much more in different fields. But it's really important to grasp what it is that you're learning, because it's very easy, because you know that it's just a click away. You might not really focus on it because you know that you've got access to it whenever you want. And things like ChatGPT, etc., they've really changed the way in which I think people are going to learn. I've seen how people are now writing their essays on ChatGPT and stuff. So that could be a bit of a challenge for plagiarists, people who are sort of dealing with plagiarism, etc. But yeah, learning is so important.
I want to touch on one of the points you brought out there about the different ways of learning. So, of course, technology has made it easier for us to access information, and often that leads to an information overload to an extent. And in this day and age, I think that's a bigger problem than a lack of information. But you mentioned that one-to-one kind of element of learning from other human beings is fundamental, and it's something that was perhaps one of the only ways you could do things previously. And coming to the question is the concept of mentorship. How do you approach that in your life, both in terms of seeking out mentorship yourself throughout your life, and also mentoring others? How do you approach that?
Yeah, so I've been very fortunate that I've had really amazing mentors who probably weren't official mentors. It wasn't as if, you're my mentor, I'm going to go to you. But it'd be very often an informal arrangement where there might have been a line manager or a senior director or another exec in my place of work that I could turn to and go to and have a sort of water cooler conversation with on a fairly regular basis. This is what they'd say, what are you doing? How are you dealing with staff? And I found that really beneficial. And approachability was really important, right? So a mentor, someone who has a lot of knowledge and a really good lived experience, for them to be approachable is the first big hurdle that gets broken down. So once they're approachable, then you feel that you're comfortable talking to them, and you're not worried about saying something stupid, because the reason why you're going to a mentor is because you want to improve. And because you are acknowledging that you're not the finished product. So you're going to say things which do maybe sound a little bit stupid later. You think, I can't believe I actually asked that. But that's all part of the learning exercise. And I think you should be fearless. You shouldn't be worried and scared to make mistakes. You shouldn't. No question is a stupid question. If it's something that occurs to you, then it's something which you should sort of get addressed. So that's the first thing. So approachability, not worrying about asking silly questions, but also having a degree of structure in how you engage with your mentors and whoever your mentors are. Choose people that are going to enrich you in terms of what skills you're looking to still acquire, what knowledge you're still looking to acquire, and be structured in how you go about engaging with them. And that's something which I did as I got better at this, in that, I started thinking about my CV, and I thought, this is what my CV looks like right now. This is the kind of role I'd like to have in 5 years' time. I can clearly see what the gaps are. What do I need to be able to fill those gaps? Who do I need to talk to? And then what kinds of questions do I need to ask them? And what kinds of experiences have they had that I can benefit from? So there is a degree of science behind this. It's not just go off, have a quick conversation. I met the CEO in the lift, and I asked him a question. That was a great question, and he gave me a great answer. Have some structure, and then process what you've learned. Go home, write it down, put it in your CV. Make sure you've got clarity in terms of if, as a result of a conversation with a mentor, you realize that you need to do some courses, and there's so many online courses that are free now. You can literally almost pack your CV with really, really good content that's going to be very, very valuable in an interview just by being online. There's so many good courses, whether it's MIT or Coursera and all these other different places they do free courses. It's great. So the experiences that I had when I went to people who were mentors for me is what I've now used in terms of when I'm engaging with people that come to me for mentoring. And again, it's about approachability, having a bit of a sense of humor. Nobody wants a mentor that's going to just be, sort of blood and thunder sort of thing. And they want someone who's going to, as I say, be lighthearted and be someone that they can relate to. But you've got to have a relationship with your mentee where they're comfortable that if you're going to be unpicking their career or unpicking their approaches, that they're not going to take it personally. I had some pretty, blunt words said to me as I was going through that process, and I really benefited more from that than when someone was being nice to me. So I think it's I think it's really important that there's honesty, that there's trust, and you know that you'll choose a mentor that you trust. And that's really important. That they're not there getting some sort of gratification from putting you down. That's clearly not the right mentor. But if you get a mentor that says that this is what you're doing badly at the moment, and this is what you really need to focus on, and these are the skills that you need to acquire, and this is how you need to go about acquiring them, then you might be in a bit of an uncomfortable place to start with, because it might dawn on you, how far from the finished product you are. But that's a good learning exercise. That's exactly what you need to go through, and because then that's the first step towards doing something about it.
I wanted to touch on kind of how you deal with uncertainty and being uncomfortable. I think especially amongst like our generation, the idea of being uncomfortable or being put in a position where someone has said something blunt to you can kind of send you into a negative spiral of thoughts. Is that maybe something that you experienced when you were a junior, when you first started the world of work? How do you kind of deal with that idea of being uncomfortable and working through that?
Yeah, I mean, we're all human, and I'm not going to say that when I was younger we were way more resilient. Maybe we weren't. Maybe we just didn't talk about it as much. We didn't suddenly tell everybody that someone said something and I've got an issue now, or I'm really struggling. We internalized it, which probably wasn't a good thing. But we cracked on. I sometimes think now there's, some of that resilience is important, and you do need to sometimes think that you can't let everybody's words hurt you. You need to take the positive from those words. If there's something that would lead to self-improvement, take that and move on. But don't dwell on, someone said this and, I'm now sort of going into some sort of depression because of it. Be philosophical about it. Some of the best advice you often get from people can come through criticism, as long as it's constructive criticism. Sometimes, I've been shaped by the experiences I've had. I'm not going to advocate that it's great to be racist, but some of the experience that I've had has been on the receiving end of racism, and that's made me more resilient. It's made me think that I would never want to treat somebody like that. It's also made me think that I feel sorry for the person that does that, because someone who is saying something like that and behaving in that way, they're really missing out on having good, productive, fruitful relationships with diverse set of people, and that word diverse is really important there. You learn so much from people who are from different backgrounds and different ethnicities, etc., religions, and I think it's really important that you don't, as I say, you don't take everything to heart. Mm-hmm. And there is a culture at the moment. I have this conversation with my kids, with people younger, some of my friends' kids, about the fact that you've got to be focused in terms of what you want to achieve. And there's always going to be people out there saying things that are going to be negative, and they're just going to, now with social media, somebody can just make a comment, a throwaway comment, and your life shouldn't spiral out of control because someone said something like, which was negative about you. So to answer your question, I've been fairly philosophical about this as I've grown up, and I've tried to be. I've not been perfect. I've sometimes been affected, and sometimes I've got a bit sad, maybe a little bit depressed when someone said something negative, but then I've sort of picked myself up, and the philosophical part comes again for me as a Muslim. It comes from the fact that the most important one I feel I have to always please is Allah, and if I'm pleasing Allah, then you're not ever going to be able to please all the people. There's always going to be some people who are not going to be happy with you. So I draw my strength from that.
You mentioned this concept of thinking about your CV, thinking about kind of where you want to be, having a solid idea of that, identifying the gaps. Now, to take an almost kind of macro view of your career, right from leaving university into your first job to now, could you talk us through a little bit about how you saw your own career developing and give us some sort of kind of chronology of that to an extent? The reason I ask that is one of the aims we have with this podcast we're doing is to give young people not a blueprint, but examples of how other people have develop their careers. So it'd be good to understand that from in your own words.
Okay, so I sort of talked about my sort of academic background, which is very analytical, maths and economics and all that stuff. And then my first job after leaving university was working as a supply and logistics analyst at Kuwait Petroleum. So Kuwait Petroleum had a series of petrol stations across the country and across Europe as well. And my role was to work out, to do the math really on the optimum way in which fuel products could be delivered to these different petrol stations, right? So there was a little bit of maths, and it was really, for me, it was like problem solving, and that's what I really enjoyed. So I suddenly got into a job which was problem solving, used my maths. I was in a corporate environment. I loved oil and gas. I grew up in Saudi as well, so I had this sort of affinity with the oil and gas industry. So working in a Kuwaiti company was, it ticked quite a few boxes, and I got to meet some great people. And in fact, I was taken into that job. I applied to be a part of the graduate intake. And then on my first day, they said to me, look, we've had somebody leave. Would you like to step up into a management role? I was like, you must be joking. I thought it was a joke. And then they said, no, we think you could do this. So I ended up effectively working directly for the director, who was a very, very hard taskmaster. And he probably coached me in ways which wouldn't be acceptable now, in terms of the bluntness with which he spoke to me and some of the things. He would be quite aggressive at times, not just with me, but others as well. But more often than not, he'd put his arm around me and say, I'm hard with you because I think you're really good. As I say, I don't think that approach is allowed anymore. But I don't have any bitterness or resentment, because I feel I learned through that sort of experience. So I did that, and that was all sort of downstream petroleum. And then 3 years later, I joined Amoco, the American oil company. And that was to get some upstream experience. I felt I wanted to carry on pursuing my career in the oil and gas industry. So getting involved in an upstream side where the product, gas or oil, is actually coming out of the ground. So I was a gas trading analyst. So I was supporting the gas trading room in terms of the deals they were doing, and advising them, again from an analytical perspective, on what the best place is to get to take the gas, whether it's through exchanges, purchases, or actually extracting it from the ground. Really enjoyed that role. And then Amoco got taken over by BP. And around that same time, I had a fairly strong idea in my mind already that I didn't want to just have that one industry on my CV. I wanted to have at least 2 industries on my CV. So just by chance, I got approached by Cable and Wireless. And they were offering a role to do a pricing analyst role. And it was a dot-com era. It was really taking off. And I thought, this is a great industry to get into. And I joined Cable and Wireless in 1999. And what was interesting for me was suddenly I'd gone from a barrel of oil or a therm of gas, so you don't have that many products in there when it comes to oil and gas, to suddenly having like so many products in telecoms, in ICT. And he thought, he couldn't keep on top of it all. There was voice and data, then within each of those areas there were so many different products. So it was a bit overwhelming at first. But the key skills that I was using, again, were the analytical skills. I was a pricing manager, then I became head of pricing for UK, then I became head of pricing for Europe. And then I moved, pricing was just one of the levers that we had, and then it became clear that there are so many other levers in terms of the commercial sort of engagement. So I became a commercial manager, I became a senior commercial manager, I became a commercial director. And basically I was owning the commercial relationship at Cable and Wireless for a whole bunch of really important clients. So I was going out with the global account directors to negotiate big deals, like multi-million-pound deals. And I was the guy that was responsible for the commercials. So I did that. Then I got recruited by BT. I got headhunted by BT in 2006 and took a slightly regressive step because I was a commercial director. I came into BT as a principal commercial manager. And that was a very deliberate decision. BT was Cable and Wireless's biggest competitor. And the reason I decided to take this role, even though it was slightly regressive, as I said, in terms of my CV, was because the opportunities that I was going to be able to work on were going to be so much bigger in terms of value. I was going to be able to work on 400, 500 million pound deals, which I didn't have that opportunity at Cable and Wireless. So I decided that this was going to be a great opportunity. So BT were going to be able to offer me deal sizes that were so much bigger, and that excited me. And I felt that it was a calculated decision to go for a role which felt like slightly backward step, but working in a bigger organization, working on bigger deals. And there was much more of a financial bent to this role as well. So as a principal commercial manager, I actually became head of commercial finance. I was probably the first non-accountant to be the first to be head of commercial finance. So I was responsible for assessing opportunities, looking at their P&L. Sales teams would come seeking approval for multi-million pound opportunities, much bigger size deals than I was used to. But the disciplines and the skills I needed to be able to do that and that assessment were already there, and I really enjoyed that role. And then it became apparent to people when I was doing that role that I had quite a strong sales sort of skill set as well in terms of engaging with customers. So I was offered a role as a senior deal architect, where you're actually responsible not just for the commercials but actually architecting the whole deal. And they were keen for me to do that role in the Middle East. We were pursuing quite a lot of business there with a lot of the license holders, whether it's fixed or mobile, people like Etisalat and STC, Batelco, etc. So I moved out to Dubai, working for BT in 2007, and had a really great time there in terms of doing some real landmark deals with some of the, as I say, some of the operators out there. And then came back to the UK, and that was 4 years later, primarily because of my kids' education. I wanted them to go through the UK education system. They were coming up to their 11. My daughters were coming up to their 11 plus exams, and so we came back. And then I went back into commercial finance for a while, and then I got a role as head of business development for BT Health, which was a really interesting role because this was all about looking at the technology that BT provide the NHS, and most of the technology for the NHS actually in the UK is underpinned by BT. So basically taking that technology and commercializing and selling it in places like the Middle East and Turkey. So I got involved in a whole bunch of different deals in Turkey and Kuwait and Saudi and UAE, and it was a great role because it allowed me to get exposure to ministers of health in these countries, go out with ministers from here. I went out as part of a UK trade delegation with people like Earl Howe, Lord Kekar, Lord Aradazi, Anna Soubry MP, a whole bunch of different sort of senior sort of health officials from the UK. And I was the guy that was the technology lead, if you like. So BT were the technology partner, and I was the technology lead. So I was evangelizing what we're doing in terms of digital hospitals, telehealth, telemedicine, and helping, for instance, the Saudis and the Kuwaitis, Emiratis upgrade their entire health infrastructure in terms of technology. So I did that role, and then almost sort of bringing it up to date. I came back to the UK. I was based in the UK most of that time, but I was traveling quite a bit. And then my next role after that, because some of the deals I've been involved in had been very, very complex and technologically complex, I was asked to apply for a CTO role for Credit Suisse. And Credit Suisse is one of BT's biggest customers. Back then, it was probably about £1.2 billion. So it was a very, very big and very big, important customer. So I was given the opportunity to be the CTO on Credit Suisse. And I couldn't understand actually why they wanted me to be the CTO, because I said, look, my perception of a CTO was someone who is an engineer, comes from a sort of a very technical background, and I'm more commercial and more sort of deal architect type role. But they said, the people who were hiring me said, we're looking to basically bring in someone who is very commercially savvy, business savvy, and understands the technology. And you understand the technology because you've done so much of this stuff before. So I did that role, really enjoyed it, and I think I was doing it for just under 3 years. And then as a result of the techniques I employed in that role, they decided that they wanted me to be responsible for more than just Credit Suisse. So I had a number of accounts. So I became CTO across a number of accounts. And then that's progressed to my current role now, where I head up the CTO function facing off to customers across all of BT Business, and BT Business is our global and our enterprise business brought together. So I run a team of CTOs who are probably the most proficient and the most authoritative CTOs I would say maybe even in the industry, actually, some of these guys are very, very competent, real authorities on whether it's networking or collaboration or security, etc. And so what we do is we go in, we talk to customers about how, first of all, we understand what their business objectives are, where they are now, where they want to get to in 1, 3, 5 years, and how technology can be an enabler for that. And that would be looking, as I say, at network, looking at how they're consuming cloud, looking at how they collaborate both within the organization and also outside, and obviously securing the entire digital enterprise.
So you mentioned about coming into this CTO role, and you also previously mentioned the adage that, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Now, I think with any leadership position, by definition, the people you're working with are going to know things that you don't. But when it comes to technology, that can often be an even bigger challenge. Right? Things are esoteric, they're opaque. How do you deal with that? How do you work with people who are experts in their fields, yet know enough to kind of get the best out of them? How do you approach that?
Yeah, it's probably the biggest challenge, but also the most exciting part of my role, actually, because I go to dinners, I go to conferences, engage with customers where you meet people who are real experts in their field in terms of technology, and you every time you meet with them, you realize how much you don't know about a certain topic. There's so many buzzwords out there like artificial intelligence and a whole bunch of other things, which it's a continuous learning exercise. And I think what I try and do is I try and make sure that I ask the questions which are going to help me understand what I need to know about that particular topic for what I needed that information for. So I'm engaging with customers, and if I'm engaging with a customer and they want to know what my thoughts are on AI being used in terms of our BSS or OSS type, business support systems, operation support systems, areas, then I'll engage with someone who's an expert in terms of AI and then ask questions which are relevant to the kinds of things that I'm looking at AI for. So I'm conscious that I don't want to boil the ocean or try and get so much knowledge that I'm going to be overawed myself. So try and acquire knowledge in bite-sized chunks so that things stick. And it gets harder as you get older. You guys are young, but as you get older, it becomes harder to sort of retain knowledge as well. So it's all about acquiring knowledge with a very distinctive purpose in terms of why you're acquiring it in these bite-sized chunks, but then also making sure that you continuously validate that. So the next time I go to another dinner and there's another guy who's also an expert in artificial intelligence, I'll be relaying to him what I know about that. I'll be validating what I heard from the other guy, and this guy's going to think this guy knows quite a bit. And actually, I'm just taking information from one place to another, which is what we do, right? That's what everyone does. You just take knowledge from one place to another place, and you build your knowledge bank that way. So that's generally what I would do. But then there's a lot of sort of reading around the subject that I would do by myself. And we were talking about technology and how it's easy now to acquire knowledge. There's so many videos that you can watch on YouTube. You can literally learn any of this stuff just online. But for me, it's really helpful because it helps me validate my knowledge already, but also gives me ideas about other things that others may not have thought about. So, what about us doing this in that particular space? And then you start sort of having more creative conversations as well. Because a lot of my role is about the art of the possible. What can we do? How can we use technology to improve people's lives? How can we make things safer? How can we make things quicker, more agile, more scalable? COVID was something which changed the landscape massively, because what everyone saw with COVID was people started working from home a lot more. They also so when they were working from home, they needed the same kind of connectivity, the same kind of surety in terms of the systems they were using, the platforms they were using, and access to those systems and platforms, as if they were in the office. So being at home and having that sort of hybrid working environment changed things. So technology had to really step up to be able to enable that. The internet became much more important as a means of business communication in terms of a network, as a business network. So we saw that, but also collaboration tools like Zoom and Teams and WebEx and all this stuff. So I think it's really important that you think about being creative, the challenges that you're facing at any moment in time. Something like COVID can come along, and then suddenly you've got a whole bunch of different challenges that you didn't have before. And we're going to continue to see this. And technology is moving at such a fast pace that, and we have to make sure that we move at that same pace. We've got to be able to think about how we can apply that, as I say, for the different challenges we've got.
Just something that I wanted to touch on, actually, about what you said about collating knowledge, actually. When you're gaining new knowledge or you're validating existing knowledge, how do you go about actually recording that? Is that something which is just you have the mental capacity to remember all these things, or do you have a certain system you use, how you write things down?
Yeah, no, I certainly, I'm not going to blag here and say I remember it all. I write stuff down. So I would write it down in my little book by hand, or I would go and type something up. Very often, the way in which I end up recording information is that if I've learned something or something's really useful, I'll send an email to somebody about that. So there might be somebody in my team that I want to. So the process by which I'm effectively storing that information is actually articulating it in an email to one of my team or to a colleague or somebody and saying, this is what I understand. What are your thoughts on this? So that basically then it's a record of, and so I've got that. An email is often a very good way, because when you're disseminating that knowledge, first of all, you're storing it, so it's there. Then you're disseminating it. Then thirdly, you're getting somebody else's view on that same topic. So it's enriching the whole process as well. So sharing knowledge, I think, is a really good way of basically collecting knowledge as well.
Now, obviously, we've covered a lot of nuggets of wisdom and advice throughout this conversation. But as we draw to a close, if you were to reflecting on your own career and how the world has changed since then, if you were to give a piece of advice to young people today at the start or in the early stages of their career, what would you tell them?
I would tell them that they've got to be comfortable in their own skin. They've got to be their authentic selves. Bring your authentic self to work. Don't try to be somebody that you're not, because you'll get found out. Be authentic, be clear about who you are, be clear about what your values are, and make sure that you engage in that corporate, in that workplace, wherever you are, whether it's a small, medium enterprise or a large corporate. Engage in a way with integrity, deal with people with respect so that you get respect back, and be very clear about, in your own mind, about the value that you're adding in that role that you're doing. Be very clear that whether anybody else validates you or tells you that you're adding value or you're not adding value, that is important. But most importantly, you need to know that yourself, that when I turn up to work every day, how is that company, how is that enterprise better for me being there? What do I bring to the table? Be very clear about that, because people who have that mentality will always grow. They'll have a growth mindset. They'll always be thinking, I do this right now, but I don't do X, Y, and Z. I should be doing that as well. I don't do that at the moment because I don't have these particular skills. Then it'll become, a journey of sort of acquiring knowledge and acquiring skills. So I think being self-critical is very good, in terms of being clear about what your ambitions are, where you want to get to, and don't worry that your ambitions change. When I was younger, I wanted to be an Air Force pilot, and then I wanted to be a professional cricketer, and then I wanted to be something else. Then, my ambitions have changed, and I sometimes feel that, Allah guides you towards you doing and becoming whatever you're going to become. So there's probably a large part of my personality which is a bit of a control freak, that I want to be in control of all of the variables, and that pertains to my career as well. But as I've got older, I realized that I'm not really in control. God's in control, Allah's in control, and put your trust in Him. Acquire knowledge, work hard, have integrity, be somebody that people look at and say that he's trustworthy, be somebody who is clear about the value that he or she adds, and then engage. Engage in a positive way, and engage with a positive mindset. It's very, very easy to always highlight all the things that aren't right with an organization and things that aren't going well, but it's harder in those difficult times to think, well, actually, we do this very well. This is something we should, accentuate the positive. So that's what I would say. I'd say, to sum up, I'd say be authentic, be yourself, be comfortable in your own skin, be self-critical, not to the point where it becomes debilitating, but so that it's constructive for you. Engage with people with integrity, with honesty, and in a trustworthy manner, and keep a smile on your face. It's so important to keep a smile on your face. People don't talk about that enough, especially people who come from minorities. They feel that they've got to work twice as hard as everybody else because there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of diversity and inclusion, and because of that, people very often end up being very serious. And I think it's important to keep a perspective and keep good-natured and have a smile on your face, because it's a means to an end. There are much, much more important things in life than just work. Work is a means to an end. And your family, the relationships that you have, those are the things that really matter. So keep that perspective.
And just one final question from us as we close off is, when all is said and done, what do you want people to remember Azeem for?
Azeem talked a lot. No, I'd say, hopefully they'd remember me as someone who had a smile on his face. That if I engage with somebody, that in some way I made their life better in some way. Whether it was through something I said or something I did, that they benefited in some way from my lived experience, and that they felt that I was approachable, that anything that I said or did was communicated with the right intent, which was to help them. And I think that's again, as a Muslim, I believe that we're going to be judged in terms of how we dealt with our fellow mankind, and and planet Earth and everything else that a trust for us from God, and how we engage with our with humanity, the rest of humanity, and how we engage with the planet, and how we are with it, pretty much everything in our environment is really, really important. So I'd like to be hopefully remembered as someone who had a positive impact on all of those things, as opposed to a negative one.
That's fantastic advice, and thank you so much for the conversation. I know I definitely found it incredibly enlightening and a lot of wisdom there to take away. So thank you so much for the time.
Thank you very much. It's very kind of you. Thank you.